Night fell cruelly above St. Grace Hospital in room 304. Ethan Parker, 8, struggled silently with a fate that seemed inevitable. The beeping of the heart monitor was intermittent, each beat weaker than the last. Sarah and Michael, his parents, sat by the bed, unable to hold back their tears. Ethan's pale figure. His eyes were closed, his breathing labored, and neither of them knew how to carry him. Charlie, the faithful golden retriever, never left his side as he lay on the edge of the bed. The dog rested his muzzle on the boy's arm, as if trying to protect him from something invisible. A few hours earlier, Dr. Richard Coleman had walked into the room, a serious expression on his face. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "There's nothing more we can do. Ethan's heart is too weak." The words seemed to pull the rug out from under him. Sarah and Michael knew time was running out, but hearing the final verdict was unbearable. From then on, the room felt like a prison of despair, where every word, every second was filled with silence. Tears and lost looks, but Charlie, for some reason no one could understand, seemed to want to give up. The dog was pacing back and forth as if waiting for something. Suddenly he stopped and pricked up his ears. His attention was drawn to the window where the light of the full moon seemed to penetrate the glass with an unusual intensity, as if he could sense something that humans could not. The air in the room seemed to change. Sarah, noticing the dog's restlessness, looked at Michael with a mixture of hope and despair. Suddenly Ethan's heart monitor began beeping irregularly. The sound was a loud, piercing alarm, causing Sarah to scream, "Doctor, please come soon." The medical team rushed into the room. Chaos took over the space. Dr. Coleman was setting up equipment while the nurses tried to stabilize Ethan's condition amidst all the commotion. Charlie jumped up on the bed, pressing his entire body against the boys. "Get that dog out of here," Dr. Coleman ordered, clearly annoyed. "No," Sarah begged. With shaking hands, "Please let him stay. We've tried everything." The doctor hesitated but allowed it. Charlie lay down next to Ethan. His deep breaths seemed to be drowning along with the boys. What happened next left everyone in the room. The frozen heart monitor began to slowly stabilize. Ethan's body stirred for the first time in days. He opened his eyes and in a voice weaker than a whisper he muttered, "Charlie, you didn't leave me." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah's tears turned to sobs as Michael held his son's hand tightly. Dr. Coleman looked on in disbelief, unable to explain what he had just seen, but there was something in Charlie's eyes that seemed to say he knew that somehow there was something more powerful. And in that moment there was one question in the air: how far would a dog's love go to save the one they loved most? The relief in the room was instantaneous, but no one could comprehend what had just happened. The doctors looked at the monitors as if they were witnesses. Something impossible. Ethan's eyes remained open. His breathing was weak but steady as Charlie lay next to him, as if the simple pressure of it was causing a miraculous change. Sarah held her son's face with both hands. The tears flowed endlessly. "You are here, Ethan. You have come back to us," she whispered. Her voice was filled with emotion. Dr. Coleman still looked incredulous as he stepped forward. He looked at Sarah and Michael carefully, trying not to give them false hope. "I don't know what happened, but Ethan is answering. We will keep a close eye on him. This recovery is unusual," he said, choosing his words carefully as if he couldn't believe what he was saying. As Ethan's parents focused on him, something strange was happening to Charlie. The dog, usually energetic and full of life, seemed exhausted, as if he was carrying a huge burden. He climbed off Ethan's bed and lay on the floor, but his eyes never left the boy for a moment. Sarah noticed the change and stroked Charlie's head. "You saved Ethan. Charlie, you are our angel," she said. Her voice was full of gratitude. Despite Ethan's sudden improvement, the tension still hung in the air. The doctor ordered a series of immediate tests to see what was going on. The nurses began moving equipment around the boy as he lay still, silent but conscious. Sarah and Michael were instructed to wait outside, but neither of them wanted to leave the room. Something inside them, they were saying that Ethan needed them more than ever, and so did Charlie. Meanwhile, Michael began to remember something he had read years ago. He looked hesitantly at Sarah and asked if she had ever heard of animals healing people. It was unscientific, but Sarah shook her head, still holding Ethan's hand. "Michael, I don't know what happened, but I'm beginning to believe that Charlie did something none of us understand." At that moment Ethan closed his eyes again, not from weakness but in a peaceful rest he hadn't had in weeks. And although the monitors showed stability, there was still a sense of mystery in the air. Was it Charlie's love that had saved Ethan, or was there something deeper and more inexplicable going on between them? The hours following Ethan's recovery were marked by tense silences and lingering questions. He was alive and stable, but the medical team couldn't explain what had happened. Dr. Coleman, known for his skepticism and faith in science, spent hours going over the initial test results. nothing seemed to didn't justify Ethan's sudden improvement. Meanwhile in the room Charlie remained attentive although his energy was noticeably fading. Something about the dog's demeanor was intriguing, as if he had sacrificed a part of himself to save the boy. Michael couldn't take his eyes off Charlie. He remembered a story his grandfather had told him when he was little about dogs who, in times of dire need, could share their life force with the people they loved. It was an ancient belief with no scientific basis, but the image of Charlie next to Ethan brought back a flood of memories. He hesitated before sharing it with Sarah, but seeing the distant look in his wife's eyes he decided to take a chance. Sarah, Charlie, he doesn't seem strange to you. He looks tired, not like a dog that has been running around all day, but something deeper. Sarah was still holding Ethan's hand. She looked at her husband. He was different, yes, but I can't help but think he feels the same. Ethan senses that they are somehow connected as they whisper to each other. Ethan opened his eyes again. This time he was more attentive and his lips. Ethan's eyes widened as he looked at Charlie. He's been with me this whole time, Mom, Ethan murmured. His voice was almost a whisper, but there was a power in it that made Sarah and Michael exchange surprised, puzzled looks. What do you mean, dear? Sarah asked, leaning closer to her son. It was dark when I felt like I was alone. He was there. I could hear Charlie. He wouldn't let go of me. Ethan's words filled the room with a heavy yet emotional atmosphere. Michael swallowed hard, trying to take in what his son was saying. How could a dog be where Ethan was? He looked back at Charlie, who now appeared to be fast asleep on the floor next to the bed, but his ears were slightly alert as if he were still on guard. Later that night, when the hospital was finally quiet and the frantic pace of the nurses had slowed, Sarah sat down next to Ethan while Michael went out to get coffee. It was then that Ethan said something that made her heart stop for a moment. Mom, when I was in that dark place, I heard a voice. It was like Charlie was calling me, but not just him. I felt like someone wanted me to stay. Like it was important that I not go. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. She couldn't answer right away. All she could think of was the terrifying yet comforting thought that there was something beyond what the eyes could see. Something or someone had gone through Charlie to bring Ethan back, and as she held her son's hand, watching him fall asleep again, one question echoed in her mind. What eyes did Charlie know that they didn't? The next morning, the hospital room was eerily quiet. Ethan was still fast asleep, but his breathing was peaceful. Sarah hadn't seen that in weeks. Michael was sitting in the chair next to him, his gaze fixed on Charlie. The dog was still in the same place, his head heavy on the floor. It seemed like all his energy was focused solely on being there. Sarah noticed it too and whispered, Michael, have you noticed that he never leaves Ethan's side? He hasn't eaten since yesterday. Michael nodded, but there was something else that was bothering him. When he finally got up the courage, he walked up to Charlie and gently ran his hand through the dog's golden fur. The dog didn't react right away. He just looked up with tired eyes and took a deep breath. There was sadness in them mixed with something Michael couldn't quite describe. It was almost as if Charlie had realized something that humans couldn't comprehend. Maybe he knows more than we realize, Michael muttered almost under his breath. Meanwhile he began to stir in bed. His eyes slowly opened, and when he saw Charlie on the floor he reached out to touch him. Sarah quickly helped him sit up, worried, but Ethan seemed determined. I need him, Mom, he's the reason I'm here, the boy said, his voice still weak but firm enough to leave Sarah speechless. The moment was interrupted when Dr. Coleman walked into the room holding a clipboard with an expression that was a mixture of relief and confusion. Ethan's tests are normal, but that doesn't make sense. There's no indication that he could have gotten better so quickly. I don't know how to explain it. He looked at Michael and Sarah, hesitating before continuing. Have you noticed anything unusual, any changes that could have caused this? Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. They didn't know how to explain what was happening without looking crazy. After all, who would believe that the bond between a boy and his dog could be the key to something so miraculous? All we know is that Charlie never left his side. Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice calm. Maybe that helped. Dr. Coleman looked at Charlie as if considering the unlikely possibility. He knew he couldn't base his conclusions on anything other than science, but the intensity of the dog's gaze made him hesitate for a moment. Well, we'll continue to monitor Ethan, but I have to say, this case is unique. When the doctor left, Michael went to the window, trying to find answers in the gray landscape outside. He knew that something unusual was happening, something that defied any logical explanation. And as he looked at Charlie, who now seemed even more exhausted, he felt a wave of guilt for not being able to ease the burden the dog seemed to be carrying. One thing was certain, although Charlie had played his part, no one could explain what motivated him. What did he know and, more importantly, how far was he willing to go for Ethan? Charlie stayed by Ethan's side, his eyes now dull and his strength visibly waning with each passing hour. Sarah felt her heart squeeze harder and harder as she watched the dog. It seemed like he was losing something vital, but his determination to protect Ethan was unwavering. Michael began to notice subtle changes in the dog's behavior. He no longer responded to the sounds around him or even raised his head when his name was called. It seemed like his very existence was fading. Ethan, however, showed an improvement that no one could explain. That afternoon he asked to sit on the edge of the bed. His voice, once weak, was now firmer. "Mom, I need Charlie to stay with me, even if he is tired," Ethan said quietly, holding the dog's leash. Sarah tried to hide the worry on her face, but Charlie's fragility was all too obvious. How could she refuse her son when he seemed to be coming back to life after a nightmare? Michael, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. During the night beyond his understanding, he stood up and walked out into the hospital corridor where he stood looking at the sky through the window. The stars were shining brightly, but there was something unsettling about the scene. How could this happen? He muttered under his breath. Why did it feel like Charlie was giving a part of himself to Ethan? When he returned to the room, he found Sarah sitting next to Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully. Charlie, as always, remained motionless on the floor, his eyes fixed on the boy as if he was standing guard. The silence in the room was completely broken. Just the sound of Ethan's soft breathing made Michael feel a lump in his throat. As he approached the dog, he knelt down next to Charlie and ran his hand over his head, whispering, "You're doing something none of us understand, aren't you? But at what cost?" The next morning, Dr. Coleman showed up with new test results, his voice incredulous. There was no way to explain it. Not only was Ethan stable, but he was showing signs of a full recovery. If this continued, he could be discharged in a few days. He looked at his parents with a mixture of joy and confusion. "But I have to ask, was there some kind of intervention we don't know about regarding Michael?" Sarah hesitated. How could they explain that the beating heart in that room was not Ethan's, but Charlie's? The dog seemed to be silently fighting for its owner, sacrificing itself. No one knew how far this could go. No one could ignore the fact that every step Ethan took toward life seemed to cost Charlie some of his life force. Michael, unable to bear the weight of the situation, walked out into the hallway again, this time with tears in his eyes. Something was going to happen. Something no one could stop. The night in the hospital passed in silence. Ethan slept peacefully, while Charlie seemed more and more fragile. On the floor next to the bed, the dog barely opened his eyes, as if the weight of what he had done was sapping his strength. Sarah looked at him with a heavy heart, afraid of what no one wanted to admit. Charlie was sacrificing himself. Michael stayed by the window watching the full moon light up the room. He felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt seeing the dog so exhausted. Ethan, however, woke up carefully and looked straight at Charlie. "Mom, Dad, he's tired. I know. He helped me. He saved me," the boy said weakly. Sarah stroked Charlie's head, tears streaming down her face. "You're our hero, Charlie, but now we have to take care of you." Michael tried to sound firm. "Ethan, will do our best for him. He'll be okay. Just like you." Ethan shook his head slowly. "He protected me when I was in that dark place. Now he needed rest." Michael decided to walk out into the hospital garden, looking for a moment of clarity. Outside under the silvery moonlight, he felt a presence next to him. It was Charlie, who had somehow found the strength to follow him. The dog looked at Michael with tired eyes, but they were full of determination. Michael knelt down and gently held Charlie's face, tears welling up. "Are you telling me something, aren't you?" he whispered. "But why? Does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" Charlie gently licked his hand before lying down on the grass. Even though he was exhausted, his expression was one of serenity. Michael felt like the dog was trying to communicate something he couldn't understand. As he returned to the room, Sarah noticed Michael's downcast look. "What was wrong?" she asked worriedly. "Hyung was showing us that this all had a purpose," Michael answered with difficulty, "but I think we need to prepare for what's to come." Charlie's presence raised unanswered questions. How far he would go. Ethan's morning arrived quietly in room 304, but the tension was still in the air. Ethan lay awake watching Charlie with worried eyes. The dog remained motionless by the bed. His chest rose and fell slowly as if each breath was an effort. Sarah adjusted her son's pillows, but her attention was focused on Charlie. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't have the courage to admit it. Michael entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. He stood Frozen for a moment watching the scene, Ethan held Charlie's leash while Sarah stroked him gently. Golden fur of the dog. The room was filled with a silent connection of something that went beyond words. Michael walked over, handing one of the cups to Sarah. He still didn't get up. He asked him in a quiet voice. Sarah shook her head. He wouldn't leave. Ethan sighed as if he was forcing himself to stay here even if it cost him everything. Ethan looked at his parents, his voice quiet but firm. Mom, Dad, I want us to help Charlie. He helped me when no one else could. Now it's his turn. Michael felt a tightness in his chest hearing those words. He knew Ethan was right, but how could they help an animal that seemed to give its life for love? Trying to find an answer, Ethan added, I feel like he needs us now more than ever. Later that day, Dr. Coleman walked into the room with an expression of mixed relief and curiosity. Ethan's condition was improving incredibly. If he kept up at this rate, we might be able to discharge him in a few days, he said, trying not to show his distrust of Michael. But he couldn't feel joy, and Charlie asked, pointing to the dog by the bed. Dr. Coleman frowned as he glanced at Charlie. He looked exhausted. It could be stress. Animals are very sensitive to human emotions, but other than that I don't see anything obvious. You might want to take him to the vet to be sure. After the doctor left, Michael and Sarah decided they needed to take action. They called a local vet who came to the hospital that day. The doctor, a kind woman named Ellen, examined Charlie carefully. He was very tired, but I don't see any signs of physical illness, she said as she stroked the dog gently. He looked like he was emotionally drained. You mentioned that he was very close to Ethan. Michael nodded. His voice was choked up. He hadn't left Ethan's side since this all started. It looked like he was protecting our son from something. Ellen looked at the dog with a knowing expression. Dogs have very strong bonds with their owners. Sometimes they give of themselves in ways we humans don't understand. Charlie seemed to be carrying a burden of something only he could feel. When Ellen left the room, Ethan looked serious with his expression. He turned to his parents. I want Charlie to know how much I love him. Do you promise that he will be okay? He asked, his voice full of emotion. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances, feeling the weight of the request. They didn't know what the future held for them, but one thing was for sure. The connection between Ethan and Charlie was beyond anything they could explain. Night had fallen, bringing an unusual calm to room 3-4. Ethan was now comfortably settled in bed, looking at Charlie with attentive, emotional eyes. The dog stayed by his side, but his energy seemed almost absent. His breathing was slow and heavy and the light in his eyes was starting to fade. Sarah sat down next to her son, holding his hand tenderly while Michael stood by the window, his hands in his pockets. Mom, I know Charlie is tired, Ethan said, his voice quiet but full of emotion. He's still here for me, but I feel like he's trying too hard. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She knew Ethan was right, but the thought of losing Charlie was unbearable. He's strong, my love. He did everything for you, and somehow he still protects you. Michael turned slowly, watching behind the scenes with a weight that seemed unbearable. He walked over to the bed and sat down next to Ethan and put his hand on his son's. Ethan, Charlie gave everything he had to save you. Maybe it's time to let him rest for a while. He did it because he loves you, but now he needs us to take care of him. Michael's words echoed in the silence of the room. Ethan looked at his father, his eyes filled with tears. I know, Dad, but I want him to know that I will never forget what he did for me ever. That night the room fell into an almost supernatural calm. Ethan's monitor continued to beep rhythmically, showing that the boy had stabilized. However, at Charlie's bedside his breathing seemed different. His breathing slowed even more and he could barely keep his eyes open. When he opened them for a brief moment he looked straight at Ethan as if delivering a final silent message. Michael noticed the change and knelt down next to Charlie, gently stroking his head. You did something no one else could. Can't understand us, baby. You gave it all for Ethan. Thank you for being a part of our family. The sun began to rise above the horizon, painting the sky a soft orange. As Ethan woke up with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks, he looked around the room and realized Charlie was still next to him, his head on his paws. The dog had finally calmed down. Sarah walked over to Ethan, hugging him tightly. Michael, with tears streaming down his face, placed his hands on both of their shoulders, creating a silent connection between them. They knew Charlie was dead, but his presence was still felt in the room. The sun was shining in the early moments of the morning. They all knew Charlie had not only saved Ethan but had left behind an eternal lesson. Unconditional love had the power to transform lives and stay alive even when the body is gone. The morning light filled room 304 with an unusual calm. Ethan held Charlie's leash, his eyes looking out the window. There was emptiness in the room, but also a part that no one could explain. Sarah and Michael, sitting next to their son, felt the weight of the loss but also the power of what Charlie had done. When Dr. Coleman walked in with the test results, confusion crossed his face. Ethan is not just getting better, he is stronger than we expected. This doesn't make sense. He looked at his parents, hesitating, is there something you are not telling me? Sarah took a deep breath before answering. It was love. Charlie gave everything for our son. The doctor simply nodded silently and walked away, leaving behind a sense of mystery that no one could explain. Later that day, Ethan asked permission to take a walk in the hospital garden with the help of his parents. He walked slowly to a bench under a tree. He suddenly stopped and pointed to the empty lawn ahead. "He is here." Michael looked at Sarah. Charlie refused. He asked. Ethan smiled softly. "He said he was fine and he would always take care of us." The parents exchanged tearful glances, feeling something beyond that. What? They could comprehend. Back in the room, Ethan began to draw the result. On the left, Sarah was silent, Charlie's portrait next to a bright light. As if he was protecting the family, he wanted us to know he was happy. Ethan explained that the drawing had been hung on the wall as a reminder of the dog's sacrifice and love. That night Ethan slept soundly while Sarah and Michael sat next to him. Michael broke the silence. "Charlie had shown us what true love was." Sarah nodded, holding her husband's hand. They knew that even though Charlie was gone, he was still there in every moment, uniting the family in a unique and eternal way. The days in the hospital came to an end when Ethan was finally discharged. The medical team still applauded his departure, amazed by a recovery that defied explanation. Michael carried his son's backpack while Sarah held his hand, helping him walk slowly to the car. In Ethan's pocket, Charlie's collar remained a talisman, a symbol of the love that had brought him home. Charlie's absence was palpable. The dog's bed still stood in the corner rooms, and the toys scattered around seemed to remind the family of his devotion. However, Ethan didn't seem sad. He spent the day drawing again, creating images of Charlie running through green fields under a bright sky. "Now he's happy," said Ethan with a quiet smile, "and he wants us to be happy too." Michael, watching his son, felt something stir inside him. Inspired by all that Charlie had done, he proposed something new to the family: that if we helped other animals the way Charlie had helped us, we could do it in his honor. Sarah smiled, touched by the idea. "I think he would have liked." From that day on, the family began visiting animal shelters, helping to care for abandoned dogs and find them homes. Ethan, still in recovery, joined in enthusiastically, always sharing Charlie's story with anyone who would listen. Each act of kindness seemed to strengthen the invisible bond they still felt with the dog. Over time, Charlie's memory lived on, not only in the hearts of Ethan, Sarah, and Michael, but in the lives of countless animals who were touched by his legacy and who realized that the love they received never faded, but simply grew into something greater. And so, Charlie's journey continued, not just as a memory, but as a force that inspired the family and everyone around them to spread the unconditional love he showed.